Hi, Misha here, and let's talk about the ships of the Sona using models from Eaglemoss diecast. This one we looked at. This is the flagship or command ship. And then after that we picked up the collector or science ship. And just now and just in, we have the battleship or Battlecruiser. And these were the three Sona ships featured from Star Trek Insurrection. An interesting film in the sense of how it's aged and where it's kind of placed in the series, and love it or hate it, I don't know, it's a thing. Also, a few people commented the last couple of videos the camera lens looked maybe dirty. I can definitely assure you it has been thoroughly cleaned. So if it's still doing weird stuff, it's something else. But that's one of the joys of trying to do videos when you're blind. I have no damn clue. So, oh well. I also wanted to talk about why Eaglemoss sometimes does special editions, and when they may or may not be appropriate. So we're mostly focusing on the battleship because it's new, but I do want to revisit the other Sona ships and talk about the Sona themselves a wee bit. So yeah, let's get started. I'm actually very happy to be able to do a Star Trek video. It's one of the things I started this channel off with, but there just haven't been many new things from Eaglemoss, and I like diecast. So anyway, this was the first Sona we got last year. The command ship, or the flagship. In universe, it's supposed to measure about 350 to 360 meters, so not small. Keep in mind the original Enterprise was right around 300 meters, give or take refit or not. And the Galaxy class was about 650, and the Sovereign Enterprise was 700 meters. But it also is quite thick. It has over 12 decks. We know this from in the dialogue, and it makes sense because side profile, we're pretty tall. But of course, a good chunk of the overall length are these forks, which may have something to do with the warp drive, but also probably just have to do with the overall aesthetic, because we know that the Sona are pretty artistic, but also narcissistic and egocentric people. So I could definitely see them kind of having an artsy ideal to their ships. In the real world, this was said to be designed kind of with the inspiration of a horseshoe. Also with the influencer kind of take from a stringed instrument, hence the patterning here, 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 and back here. We don't really know much about this ship, although we do see some of the interiors in the movie. We see the bridge, and most importantly, it has a command couch, not a command chair. Oh, no, no, no. Ruafo, the commander of the Sona and the ship, was too good for a chair. He wanted a couch. And let's be honest, we all know James T. Kirk would have loved to have had a command couch. And you know what? I'm starting to think that's probably what Gene Roddenberry called it in his office. But let's move on and not talk about Gene. This was a relatively small ship, more dedicated towards, well, command and control, but also luxury and medical. It had phasers, photon torpedoes. Some sources say it also had the isolytic burst, the subspace weapons, but I'm not sure if this one actually did or not, or if it was just kind of inferred because of other goings on. As far as the model itself, it's relatively light. This is metal, and then part of this is metal, but this becomes plastic. And I understand why this was the first one they did in the Sona, because it's the one we probably saw the most of. We saw interiors. But it's also the smallest one. So, should it have been just a standard edition? I would argue, honestly, yes. I think in the standard, it would have fit in quite well. And I think if they did it as a standard ship, it would probably be more metal. And probably pretty neat. But I think by this point, they were thinking, well, the movie ships, we will do those as special editions. Now, of course, originally they didn't have this notion. For example, the Valdor was done as a standard. But I think because of the JJ verse being in the special series, the kind of middle size, they just thought that would be a good idea. And sometimes I think it does work out. But with this, I think they would have been better served just making it as a standard or a bonus edition. But I'm glad they did it, because it was certainly a key vessel in the movie. As is the next one. The Sona science ship, often known as the Sona Collector, was an unmanned vessel, although it did have small areas that could be habitable. It was mostly given way for instrumentation and these sails that could deploy. It had no weapons as such, but it did have quite good shielding. And this is actually one I'm glad we do have in a special, because in the movie, this is a giant ship. Estimates are between 1,250 and over 1,500 meters. So you're looking at twice the length of the Sovereign, give or take. But again, most of it is equipment. And this was meant to harvest the, metaphasic, or whatever they called it in the show, particles from the Baku homeworld. So I think being in the larger size, and since it was kind of the main MacGuffin of the film, yeah, kind of like how V'ger was done in this scale, or the Scimitar, makes sense. Because it has a lot going on, it's pretty lightweight. The fins are plastic. The central core here is again mostly externally plastic. The metal is basically the center. This is metal here running through the back here, and so basically the whole shaft that the detailing is put on is metal, meaning it has a little bit of heft, but the outside, to give it more detailing, is plastic, or ABS if you want to be exact. And this was one I almost didn't pick up. The only reason I did was it went on sale, and I knew myself that if I ended up with the other Sona ships, I would end up wanting the Collector to kind of complete the collection, the Collector for the collection. So when they went on sale, I went ahead and picked it up, but I'm actually really glad I did. It's pretty neat and different. And I do like it when they use the specials to do interesting one-off ships like this. For example, they did the Planet Killer. They did V'ger. So I think that's a good use of the specials for the long... Because if you tried to do this in the standard scale, it would just be kind of just a long object. Doing it on the larger scale gives them a chance to really have detailing. Also, is it just me, or does it look like it could be a lightsaber? Think about it. If you gripped it like this, looks like it could be a Sith lightsaber. Maybe it's too late and I haven't slept enough. But yeah, this is one that I wasn't especially interested in, but when it came in, yeah, I kind of liked it. I wish it was more metal, but I understand because of all the details why they couldn't. But this one came in back in late summer, so I've had it for a couple of months. But I held off really talking about it because I wanted our third and final entry. The Sona Battleship, or Battlecruiser. It's called both. This is the one I really wanted. Even though it's probably the least important of the three ships, it's probably the most interesting looking, in some ways most iconic, most identifiable. And it also does really well in the special size, because if you were to do it in the standard size, it would be quite tiny. And even for a special, which is again kind of their medium scale, it is one of the largest. It's very thin, but this arc, this curve, this wing is quite large. And it's based on a boomerang, which makes sense. It does kind of feel like a boomerang. And it has the same kind of patterning here from a stringed instrument. Piano. Now in universe, there's a small discrepancy in the size. Some sources put it at just over 700 meters, meaning it's about as long as the Sovereign class, but of course much wider. And some bump that up to nearly 840 meters, which frankly makes a little more sense, because this is a lot of probably dead space or storage. And again, I think it's to look intimidating because of who the Sona were and who helped them design their ships. But yeah, this one just came out October of 2021. And what do I think of it? Easily, it's my favorite. Part of it is this thing is nearly entirely metal, which is always nice. The only noticeable plastic, even these, are metal. Little mandibles here. The only plastic bit to note is this top little wing section here. This small area is plastic, but it's so thin that doing it in metal would be quite difficult. That's the thing about die cast. You have to have a certain minimal thickness for it to work with the technology. It's very weighty too. Kind of reminds me of a batleth a little bit. Reminds me of a lot of things. You know, directly on the side and even directly straight head on. It's kind of obscured, but then when it curves and banks, you can understand why on screen it would look well. There were two of these in the Briar Patch. Even though we really don't see much on board them, they're the main combat ships of the Sona. And these have phasers, photons, and isolytic bursts, which are, as the movie clearly tells us, subspaced weapons that were banned by the Second Khitomer Accords, I believe. But they did quite the number. We don't really know if one of these is equal or greater than a Sovereign, but two of these were certainly a match for the Sovereign. But that's the, makes sense to have two warships plus whatever the command ship could toss in too against one ship. Yeah, makes sense. So a very interesting ship, and I am quite pleased with how this turned out. This one definitely is benefiting from being a special. Very glad they did it. So, with that, who are the Sona and how did they get ships? Well, as we know from the film, they were a dissident group, a breakout group from the Baku. We don't know how many Sona left, but we do know it was in the late 23rd century, so a little over 100 years before the film. And since the village was not that populous in the first place, it probably wasn't more than 100, 200 at most, and maybe just a few dozen. But they had the benefit of long lifespans coming from a technologically advanced society. And they were basically a gang of thugs, criminal gang. They enslaved lesser races, and they did what they could to accrue wealth, resources, weapons, and allies. And that's where they really seem to have gotten a lot of their ship technology. They were early partners with the Dominion. This is both stated in the movie, Insurrection, and backed up in a Season 7 episode of Deep Space Nine. They had help from the Dominion, the Jem'Hadar, the Vorta, whatever. So that would explain how they were able to construct ships. They did have a homeworld that they settled, but again, their population was not very large. In fact, the last generation was sterile. So, actual Sona, probably not more than a few thousand at most after a century. Plus the enslaved races. And let's be honest, we know from the show also harems. They had sex slaves. Let's just be honest, they did. We know this. I like to think about headcanon. This flagship here may be a pre-Dominion vessel of theirs that they bought or put together. Kind of has a little bit of a Ferengi vibe going on. Maybe just a hint of Romulan. Then you look at the actual warship. It has much more of the Dominion thing going on, from the coloration to the kind of the more insectile pincer thing. I have to wonder, since the Sona were creating Ketracel White for the Dominion, if part of their payment was not for them to build them a fixed number of ships. Now, they had 2 of these in the Briar Patch, like I said, so I'm sure they had more than that, but I'm sure it wasn't a huge number, maybe 6 or 12 at most. As far as the science ship, this, if it wasn't a one-off thing, was probably a small thing. Now, since it was unmanned, remote controlled, automated, having a ship like this that did not require people would actually be a great way, kind of putting it in orbit of a subjugated planet to be a satellite. So I could see the standard version of this maybe being a orbital weapons thing to help keep any subdued populations subdued. Again, just talking headcanon here, because we only really see the Sona in the one film, and they're only referenced a couple of times in the rest of Star Trek, usually after Insurrection. It's an interesting thing. It would be an interesting thing to kind of expand their history, make them more three-dimensional as villains. Not my favorite, but more unique, more creative than some we've come up against in Star Trek, so give them credit there. And I do like the fact that there is a Dominion connection, because the Sona of themselves would not be capable of designing and producing ships completely on their own. I wouldn't think so anyway. But since they were in the business of being thugs and allying with the Dominion and subjugating lesser races, having ships that look intimidating would fit the bill quite nicely. And each of these ships does kind of exemplify part of Sona culture. Here, for the science ship, we see their technological prowess. In fact, in some ways, they were more advanced than the Federation when it came to medical science and, well, collecting the special MacGuffin radiation from the Baku planet. So they were benefiting from the Baku's long history, and having a ship like this, yeah, it shows it. So they were thugs, but they were intelligent thugs. I like how this sits on the stand. It does a good job being cradled there. Of course, the warship shows their aggressive nature and perfect happiness to partner with anyone who suits their needs. It is a very aggressive looking ship. I like to think this is pretty well automated too, because again, they had such a small population. It would make sense that it wouldn't require a major crew to run these. That's also why they're utilizing outlawed weapons. They don't give a damn. They don't care if their subspace weapons do permanent damage, because they're kind of in it for the short term. And again, in my own headcanon, I'm not even sure the Sona built these. They could have been built for them by the Dominion, or maybe a Dominion client race, or maybe the Dominion made the ship plans and the Sona had them built by one of their subjugated races. But they were powerful. Just, yeah, probably not the most moral ship. The Klingons would not find them honorable. Come on, go on that yellow stand. It sits on the stand quite good. The weight helps. And again, the command ship, the flagship, I think exemplifies more their hedonism and just fear of death. There's medical facilities on board, of course, the famous face-stretching scenes. There's also women on board, so we know what that's up to. And the couch, of course, the command couch, that I think is hilarious. But this seems like probably the earlier ships. Still has combat capabilities. It's not without its own defenses. But it seems to kind of give more credence to their more base desires and what have you. It's a neat model, it is, but it's just kind of my least favorite of the three. I think it would have just been better as a standard edition. But what can you do? By the way, both this and the battleship launched quite large assault shuttles that we saw in the film that did bombing runs and transporter abilities. I'm hoping now that Shuttle Pack 8, which comes out next month, has alien shuttles in it for the first time, that we will eventually see maybe the Sona shuttle in the Shuttle Pack. That would kind of complete the set and give us all 4 on-screen vessels from them, because they definitely have their unique architecture. They were all designed, or at least inspired, by John Eves too, by the way. So what do you think? Do you like any of these? Do you hate them? Do you love them all? Let me know what you say. With that, let's end this video. Eaglemoss has really done all the ships from the films. Of course, we had V'ger and the oversized Katinga from Star Trek motion picture. We had the Reliant. We just got regular 1 from 2. We have pretty much everything from Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, Space Dock, the Bird of Prey, of course. Several versions of the Excelsior. And we just got a jumbo version of the Oberth. From 4, well, we haven't got the Well Probe yet. I'm not really sure what a Well Probe would end up being. Probably pretty base. But that's, I guess, something they could do. And the same thing kind of with Star Trek 5. There wasn't a whole lot of new to show, except that we did get the shuttle, which is always neat. And much goes for Star Trek 6. We, a couple new shuttles, and that's about it. And on, we had the ships from Generations. First Contact, we get all the fleet. And, of course, we needed Insurrection. We had all the other ships, so why not? And moving on, we ended up with the Scimitar and the Valdor from Nemesis. And we're getting more and more of the ships from the JJ films. Say what you will about those, they certainly leave an impression, one way or the other. So we really needed to get the Sona ships, and I'm glad we did. And it seems like every time they did one, first, second, third, they, to my mind, just get better and better. I'm terribly happy with the metal boomerang here. And I am happy they did try to give them their own feel. And they didn't just do kind of the generic alien thing that Star Trek sometimes does. The green bird. I mean, bird of prey for the Romulans and Klingons, fine. Then they kind of did it for the Orions and Enterprise. And it seems like green and bird motif is kind of a default thing for a lot of aliens. I think that's what kind of made the Ferengi Marauder interesting. It was a whole different tone. And the Cardassian Galore class and Keldon class. But I just wanted to do a nice long video talking about the Sona because there's very little out there about them. And to be fair, they're a pretty flat villain right now. But I think there's potential there if someone cared to kind of flesh out their history. So, like I said, let me know what you think. Appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you could, please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.